Hello and welcome to a brand new show of India Reboot, the show on which we would ideate, deliberate and also debate that what can bring India back on the growth track. Just when we had recovered from the economic impact of the first wave, the second wave has hit us. The second wave, both in terms of spread, magnitude and even mortality rate, is much higher than the first rate. Now, of course, we can argue and say that the first wave also had a national lockdown and this time lockdowns are regional. But when important states like Delhi, Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, when they go through a massive lockdown, it may be local in nature, it obviously will have impact on economic activity, demand and the future course of earnings. So what is the best way to reboot India? Now, to discuss that, it gives me great pleasure to bring on board Mr. Uday Shankar, President with FICCI, and with him, Mr. Sanjiv Mehta, Senior Vice President FICCI and Chairman and Managing Director of Hindustan Unilever. Gentlemen, good evening to both of you and thank you for joining us. Mr. Mehta, allow me to start with you. I'm going to start with a very broad question, which is, what is your understanding of how the economic impact of the second wave will be different from the first wave? Because for the first time, Mr. Mehta, it's gone to rural India. It has hit the definition of Bharat.
Yeah, thank you, Nikunj. Thank you for inviting Uday and me. And to give you an answer, there are differences between what happened in the same quarter last year and what's happened this year. Yeah, last year, I think the biggest impact was on the supply side because the supply lines got impacted when we went in for the hard lockdown. This time, because it was a calibrated response and localized, it was the lockdowns. The manufacturing, certainly in consumer goods or FMCG, continued during this period. So we did not suffer like we did last year. This year, you're absolutely right that it has not been left just to the urban areas, but it has gone down to tier 2, tier 3 cities, as well as it has gone down to rural areas. And where we see the disruption happening, one is, of course, when there are lockdowns, the trade hours are curtailed. And that is one area where you see the pinch happening. And the second, of course, is that the distribution in the last mile, which goes through wholesale, that gets constricted when you have lockdowns, and also have been impacted when distributors, they fall ill, or when the wholesalers or the mandis don't open. As far as the demand impairment is concerned, it's still a bit early to gauge. But if I were to pick up some of the very clear antenna, what it is picking up is that, yes, it is no gainsaying that out-of-home categories would definitely get impacted. The second would be the discretionary categories. They would also be impacted because they are directly linked to mobility to a large extent. And as far as the more essentials are concerned, like the health, the hygiene, and the food products, I don't think what we saw last year, an element of hoarding, that is not happening. And the obsessiveness, which was there last year with some of the cleaning categories, that we are not seeing this year. Yeah, because one is the availability is much better. So people are not rushing around to pick up whatever is there. So there are different play which is happening in the country. But I think what is of most concern for us is the impact it may have on the demand, because the consumer confidence will take a toll. Yeah, there is a fear, there is an element of fear. People would preserve cash. People are worried because a lot of people have spent a lot of money on health. So I think the important bit for us going forward would be is to also look at it from a lens of consumer demand and look at it as to how do we regain the consumer confidence.
Mr. Shankar, if I may use or make Mr. Mehta's answer as an extension, The difference between last time and this time, Mr. Shankar, is that in the first wave, the fear was high and the number of cases were low. This time, the fear is not only high, the number of cases are also very high. So what happens next? Are we in for a grind down with a very dark and a lull patch, or the recovery, what we saw, let's say in October and November in 2020, we could be staring in for that kind of a recovery?
So I think you put it very well, Nikunj, that what we saw last time was the fear. It was the fear of the unknown, but the impact on lives and mortality was less. This time the fear is high, and actually in the beginning, perhaps the fear wasn't so much, but suddenly the fear spiked, and so did the cases of infection and mortality. But the the big problem is that we are seeing is that as we are now, the cases are still very high, but they have dropped down from where they were to less than half or something. And we're going to start considering reopening of the economy. The problem is whether we will be able to do it in a calibrated, scientific, disciplined manner. And I'm not just talking about this from the point of view of the government, but even from the consumers and all of us citizens. Because partly if we are in this situation today, of course, the virus mutated, it was a very virulent strain, but it was also because as the reopening started last year, people started sort of behaving or believing that we had vanquished the virus and life was coming back to normal. It's very important that this time, I hope everybody, from the government to the ordinary citizens and people in villages and everyone, they take this message that reopening does not mean victory over the virus. Victory over the virus will happen only when we have vaccinated the large part of our population. And that is why I think there will be an element of fear this time. The rebound of the economy, I believe in India, I believe in the entrepreneurial genes of this country. So I think there would be a desire and there would be a rebound. But the challenges before the people to rebuild their lives, their businesses, their normal economic activity is much, much greater this time than it was the last time. Because last time there was a national lockdown, there was a pent-up demand. When it opened up, people just went about it, sorting their lives out with a vengeance. This time, I think both the power to spend and the desire to spend has taken a huge hit. Because people are, the biggest problem with the second wave is, of course, besides the enormous loss of life, etc., the biggest problem is that people believe that there might be a third wave and there might be a fourth wave. Until there is, factual and scientific reassurance that, I have got vaccine and a large part of people that I interact with have all got vaccines, that fear will be there. And that fear is likely to mute the economic revival in a very big way, besides the fact that the economy itself has taken a double shock.
Mr. Mehta, there are two factors which clearly will have a direct impact on the sentiment and the consumer demand. And the first aspect, Mr. Mehta, is inflation. Initially, when inflation came back, it was considered to be positive, but it's hurting now. And the second is expenditure towards healthcare. According to an SBI economist report, this year Indians would be spending about 75 to 80,000 crore more for the healthcare needs. Both these factors, if you have to put together and then give your verdict on consumer sentiment and consumer demand, how would you assess it, Mr. Mehta?
Yeah, Nikunj, I would look at it in a bit different lens. Yeah, I would not just focus on these two areas. The way I would focus on, I think there are three critical aspects which we as a country have to do. First is, how do we, with a fair degree of chance, ensure that we do not get a third wave? That's first very important. The second important bit is that despite working our best to ensure there is no third wave, we should be absolutely well prepared that in case the third wave happens, we're not caught on the wrong foot. And the third would be, what do we do on the economic front to spur the economy again? Yeah. So if I may cover the three and then Uday can embellish it, that when we are talking about how do we ensure that the third wave doesn't happen, I think the silver bullet is the vaccination. There's no question about that. And this vaccination just like we ramp up production during wartime, we should be looking at that we are in a war zone. How do we ramp up the production of vaccine? If you look at from a lens of how many we need, the math is very clear. If we have to vaccinate at least 60% of the adult population before end of the year, we need 1.2 billion doses. 200 million we have already given. In the next 2 months, there would be another about 150 million doses. So that means we require close to about 850 million doses in the balance part of the year, beginning August, when the capacity is always meant to be ramped up to about anywhere between 150 to 200. And here we should go absolutely flat out, whether it is the commitments to be given, whether it is the capital to be built, whether it is the raw material to be procured. And we should do as a country, a daily monitoring of all the mega facilities so that we know exactly how the production is being built. While we are ramping up the production, we should build the plans that once the production comes online, the big production from August onwards, what will we do as a country to distribute it at scale and with precision? So that's point number one. Second is learning from the second wave. Now, second wave came on us absolutely in a brutal manner. 30% of the time compared to the first wave, the number of cases were nearly 5 times more than the peak of the last time. Yeah, in a very short period, huge spurt. Now we have learned a lot how we were caught on the wrong foot, whether it is oxygen, whether it is ventilators, whether our hospital needs the oxygen plants, the PSA units, or whether how many more doctors we need, etc. This is a time as if we are again preparing for a war. We should expect that it will come on us, and we should be absolutely ready, district by district, state by state. And the third one would be the economy. Economy is, Nikunj, the difference this time would be, last time, if you recall, that the government did a pretty decent job of debottlenecking from a supply side perspective, keeping the finance accommodative and ensuring that we quickly bounce back. This time, I think we have to anticipate that there is going to be intervention required on the demand side as well. While some of the things like we did for the poor people, like in rural India, direct transfer of benefit, free food grains, ramping up the MNREGA investment, I think that has to be, the outlay perhaps might have to be increased, and that has to continue. We also have to focus on the urban poor. We have to look at it from a lens of how do we give a security cover to MSMEs, the stress sectors, and last but not the least, what do we need to do as a country within, of course, the constraints we have of our fiscal deficit, that what would it need to spur the demand? So these are 3 critical areas, in my view, that the country will have to focus on in the days ahead.
Mr. Shankar, do you think the biggest, in a sense, reform or the biggest move the government now needs to focus on is to make sure that everybody is vaccinated? I mean, that is priority number 1, to keep Indians safe and on to ensure that the economic activity picks up. Unfortunately, the numbers which have come out in last 2 weeks, they are not encouraging. There is still a lot of chaos. There is still a lot of confusion. Even though we are the official vaccine capital of the world, we are running short of vaccines.
So I think it's not just priority number 1. It should be priority number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and everything else comes after that, Nikunj. Because unless people are vaccinated, any attempt to revive the economy, bring back normalcy, and get people to go about their lives is going to be, runs the risk of being interrupted and stopped in its tracks, which is what we saw with the second wave. And there could be a third wave, God forbid. And that is why it's really, really important. And I think you're right. The numbers that we are seeing are not very encouraging, but we can turn the corner on that. It's a supply issue, it's a manufacturing issue, and it's a delivery issue. These are problems that Government of India deals with on a regular basis, and these are problems that some of us, like, Sanjiv and I and, other businesses deal with it at different levels on a regular basis. We need to make sure that the vaccine capacity is ramped up to the maximum extent possible. And we need to do a bunch of things. We need to sign firm contracts. We need to first make sure that there is a smooth channel of vaccine procurement, and there are not too many frictions in that. We need to sign contracts with vaccine manufacturers, incentivize them. Whenever we want to secure our supply lines, we sign firm contracts, we put in delivery clauses, and we give them advance. And not only that, we put our own monitors, supervisors, monitors, experts, to just make sure that there is no, there are no unprecedented or unexpected sort of hurdles that we run into. And then we need to do the distribution of it. The vaccine situation right now is a little tight, but every month it is set to get better. From the estimates that we have seen, next month in June, it should be somewhere around 10, 11 crores or 100, 110 million. In July, it should go up further. But from August, the vaccine supply situation should get much, much better. It should be more than 20, 22 crores a month. And now, if we really get ready, we need to do two things. We need to just make sure that the vaccines that we are likely to get, not a single dose shortfall happens there. And that we can do by just making sure that we have firm contracts, we have firm delivery schedules, et cetera, et cetera. Then every single vaccine that this country can use its resources to procure from outside by, again, signing contracts, paying money, and making sure that if there are any legal or other kinds of hurdles in their way, they should be brought in. And then simultaneously, we should be able to deliver, we should be getting ready already in the month of May for a very, very accelerated, very ramped up, dramatically, scaled up vaccine administration regime from July or August. And it's possible. Look, let's not forget that we do these things. We have done polio vaccination and other vaccination programs, and we have delivered great results in very crunch time frame. But the best model to our mind is a model like what the Election Commission does. Have we ever wondered that how is it that in a country as diverse as India is, over 7 or 8 days over 7 or 8 days, the Election Commission makes sure that in every remote nook and corner, people, there is an election machinery that goes there with electoral, with the voting machines, etc., and people are able to cast their votes. So I think it's really possible, and the government has demonstrated its capacity, of course, in different realms, but the government has demonstrated its capacity to do that. And if we do that, we at FICCI genuinely believe that we have clear line of sight on availability of vaccine, and we have clear line of sight on vaccinating a large mass of our population so that we can avoid, preempt the third wave ideally, or even if there is a mutation, its virulence can be blunted very, very heavily.
Mr. Mehta, they say that there are decades where nothing changes, but sometimes there is a year when a decade changes. And last 12 months, in a sense, have been a period where decade has changed. In your mind, because of this COVID crisis, what is the permanent change which will happen to consumer, operations of the company which you represent, and also the sector which you understand very deeply, consumer staples?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Nikunj. Yeah, there are, certainly I'll break it up and talk a bit about it. First is, which is absolutely the right thing, I think the consumers, we used to as a company invest crores of rupees every year to change consumer behavior when it comes to hand hygiene, or whether it comes to sanitation, or whether it comes to disinfectants, etc. And the other is the immunity or the wellness in its entirety. I think this is not going to remain a fad. The people have become very conscious. People have realized the benefit, and this is bound to stay. Of course, it is not going to remain at an obsessive manner, but this change of behavior, which is good for the country, good for the people, is certainly going to remain. The second is, if I may pick up the use of technology. it has become all pervasive. And I think, again, it's a great moment for the country that we can go up the scale when it comes to digitizing, whether it is education, whether it is distribution, all walks of life, whether it is governance. Yeah. And this is something which will bring in huge amount of efficiency. This will aid economic growth, and this will allow us to reinvent the country in many ways. The third important bit is, I think, healthcare. I think every country in the world has realized that we need to invest more in healthcare. We won't be able to live with just investing 1.5% of the GDP on healthcare. So this is something which is bound to happen. Every country will look at how do you augment the capacity. And India has a great place to become the affordable healthcare capital of the world if we play our game well. Yeah, just like during the Y2K crisis, it gave a massive fillip to the IT industry. This pandemic could give a massive fillip to the healthcare industry in the country, not just manufacturing pharmaceuticals, but the entire healthcare chain. The fourth would be from a work from home perspective or the work culture. I don't think that we should write an obituary of work from office, but there would be a much better balance. Yeah, unnecessary travel will come down, and there will be certain jobs which could best be done from home, which would perhaps be continued to be done from home. But at the end of the day, human beings are social animals, so you need to build the social capital also. But it would be done in a bit different fashion from what was being done pre-pandemic. So there are many changes which are bound to happen and which are going to remain post the end of the pandemic as well. And from our perspective, we cannot, I could talk at length. If I pick up, as a business, we've always been driven by efficiencies. But one of the core things which pandemic has made us to understand that you also need to build resilience. And resilience to an extent means a spare capacity. Yeah. The other is agility. How do you pivot with speed? Last but not the least, I think leadership makes a big difference in any business, in any country. And one of the things which is going to stand out post the pandemic is that people have understood the benefit of compassion. I think the trait of being a compassionate leader will definitely stand out even after the pandemic.
Well, brilliantly articulated, Mr. Mehta. So just we have time for two more quick questions. And Mr. Mehta, this one is coming your way. Some would argue that while the pandemic is going to reorient large companies, efficiencies would kick in, the marks and the scars would be left by smaller companies, unorganized sector, SMEs, MSMEs, because obviously it's the survival of the fittest and the adaptability theorem which will work in favor of large companies. So what happens? Select few will become big, but rest of us will languish. How would you defend that?
I won't defend that. I think it begs the question that it requires intervention. Yeah, in a country like India, where 90% of the people are engaged in what we call as the informal jobs, away from the corporate sector and governments, I think this is an area where the government will have to intervene to ensure that the MSMEs, the micro enterprises, the sole proprietors, those do not go under. And that will require a huge amount of focus and intervention. It is required not just from an economic perspective, but it is also required from a social perspective. That's what my pitch would be.
Mr. Shankar, the sector which you represent and the sector which I am part of, which is the media sector, a lot of changes have already happened, whether it is OTT or the adaptation towards digital, whether it is cutting the cord and using a smartphone as the new handheld device to consume content. What do you see this pandemic will bring about a permanent change in the sector which you represent, media? Mr. Shankar.
So I think in the broader theme, Nikunj, what Sanjiv said, that holds true, that, that a bunch of people, the long tail, those who are small creative entrepreneurs, those who are running small businesses and supporting the media and creative ecosystem, they have been hit very badly, and there is a need to make an intervention to make sure that they are able to stand on their feet. And then there are sectors like theatrical exhibition that's been devastated. And now it's more than a year and 3 months or so that theaters have been shut, and there is a downstream effect. The entire film and creative industry has been hit very badly, but and all of those need to be supported. But if you look at the other side of it, media and entertainment is a sector that was already being sort of disrupted very heavily by intervention of technology. As you said, it is OTT, streaming, but even more than that, the way content was produced, the way content was distributed, the way content was edited, the way content value addition was being created, all of that was already getting disrupted very heavily. And I think in that sense, that process of disruption and rebirth of a new media ecosystem where technologically enabled creative powerhouses will grow very, very dramatically, and they will be able to offer much higher quality of content, much higher experience of content consumption to their consumers. Those are those changes are going to get really, really stronger. My fear is that the Indian creative ecosystem is still a lot of small and medium enterprises, some very, very small enterprises. And we have to make sure that they do not go under, because if somebody has not been able to produce a show, or if somebody invested in making a small film and that film has been interrupted and they haven't been able to go back for a year or more, their ability to come back and seamlessly pick up the threads is under pressure. And I think we need to look at this. This country, as far as the media and entertainment ecosystem is concerned, we don't see this as a really core to our economic process. But it's a sector that creates tremendous economic value. It provides jobs and employment to millions and millions of people. And we have an opportunity to become a global leader in media and entertainment. And I think this pandemic could be used as an opportunity to create a framework where we allow tech-driven, highly creative enterprises to come up and take brand India and business of creativity in India to the whole next level.
Well, Mr. Shankar, Mr. Mehta, really appreciate your time, gentlemen. Thank you so very much for being part of this show. Stay safe, and I certainly hope to see much more of you going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care of yourself.
Stay safe.
Thank you very much, sir.